Hi everyone, it's Kathy. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to share this card today using the super cute new Christmas Who stamp set, as well as the coordinating dies. I'll also be using the 5 frames slimline die, and today I'll share how to create a slimline easel card. I started out by stamping the owls onto a piece of Cougar super smooth cardstock, and I stamped them using Memento Tuxedo black ink so that I could color them in with my Copic markers. I started out with this little owl, and for him I used some warm gray markers. I started with W4 and added that in the areas where it would be the darkest. So underneath and right next to his little hat and around the outer edges of his body. And as I got towards his belly, I kind of just went in a circle and made sure that I left the circle white in the center so that as I came in with my lighter markers, I could blend in towards that center and have a nice highlight on their tummies. And I did the same thing for all of the owls. So for this second owl, I used some E70 markers. I started with E77 as my darkest. And on the owls where the wings were a little bit more prominent, I did go in with my darkest color and did some pretty fine little flicks just to add a little bit more texture to their wings. The next color that I used for this guy is E74, and I did the same thing where I came in from the outer edges and flicked in towards the center, again leaving that nice white highlight so that I could have that center highlight on their belly. Next I came in with E71 and I colored in the rest of his wings and then worked a little bit more on his tummy, leaving that white spot right in the center. And then to finish him up, I came in with E70 and I colored over everything that I had previously colored just to make sure that those colors blended nicely together. For the third owl, I used a series of E40 markers, and E47 is the darkest for this little guy. And I colored this guy the same way. I added in my darkest color where the shadows would be the darkest. For his wing that's kind of hidden behind the part of his hat that flops over, I didn't try and get all 3 or 4 colors in there because it's such a small area. I just used the 2 darkest. After I was done with the E47, I came in with E44 and blended that out. And as I did on the previous owl, I did this same flicking motion, kind of in a circular motion to leave that white spot right in the center of his belly. Then I came in with E43 and blended all of it out. As far as their hats go, I'm going to share how I colored 2 pink hats and 1 green hat. On the smallest owl, I started with RV09 and I added that on the outer edges of the top of his hat, underneath the little flap on his hat, and then I added that in also from at the bottom of those little flaps and just went up a little bit, leaving quite a bit of white space so that I can maintain a highlight. For the second hat with the little pom-poms on top, I colored it pretty much the same way. I started with the RV09 and added that from the outer edges and worked my way in towards the center. And then I came in with RV06, added that a little bit more on the little owl's hat and the big owl's hat, and then I finished up with RV04. And one thing that I did want to note is that when I did come in with the RV04, I did go over all of the previous coloring just to make sure that they blended quite nicely, because RV04 tends to bleach out the other colors quite a bit. And I didn't want it to look muddy, so to get a cleaner blend, that is why I did go over the entire hat with the lightest color. For the green hat, I started with YG17 and I colored the green hat here in the same manner as I did the pink hat. I started with my darkest and added that on the outer edges right underneath the flap and then from the bottom up a little bit, and then I blended that out with YG23 and YG21. And I'll be sure to list all of the markers that I used in the description box below, as well as the products that I used. For the little reindeer hat, I kept the coloring really very simple. I just used 1 color on the ears, and then for the antlers, I thought E23 would be dark enough, and I decided that it wasn't dark enough. I wasn't getting enough contrast between the antlers in the ears, so I decided to come in with E25, and I just colored right over the E23. Then I decided to add some patterns and texture to 3 of the hats, and I used a white gel pen for that. I'm only going to share how I did this bigger green one because it's easier to see because it's so much larger. All I did was I drew lines just to end up with sort of a plaid type of appearance. I don't know if I can actually call it plaid, but just to add some lines. And I did this same pattern on the small pink hat. And then for the pink hat with the little pom-poms on top, I just added polka dots to that hat. After I was done with all of the coloring, I ran them through my die cutting machine with the coordinating dies and set them off to the side. I had run the 5 frames slimline die with a piece of white cardstock, and I also die cut a piece of white cardstock using the Slimline Card Builder die, which I forgot to show at the beginning. Anyway, the reason that I did that is because I needed to have something back those frames for when it pops up into the easel. And for the pink and green frames, it was easy for me to cut those out because I had a bunch of pink and green scraps, so it was a nice way to use up some of those scraps. For my card base, it's a regular card base that measures 8.5 by 7, and then I scored it at 3.5 on the 7-inch side, so that's your basic slimline card base. Then I scored it at 1 3/4 inches to create my easel part. And after I scored it, I folded it one way, then I flipped it around and I folded it the other way just to make sure that I got a really good crease. Next, it was time to add the panel with the die cut frames on it. And to make sure that I didn't glue my card closed, I actually put my adhesive on the front of the actual card base itself, and I made sure to only add adhesive underneath the score line, and I didn't take the adhesive all the way out to the very outer edges or all the way down to the bottom, because the 5 frames slimline die isn't 8.5 inches, it's 8 1/4 inches. So there is a little bit of a border around the edge. So after adding that adhesive underneath the score line, I adhered my 5 frames slimline piece to the front of that, and I did put a bunch of foam tape on the back of the owls and just placed them inside each of the frames. And then I decided to add a couple of snowflakes, so I die cut those using the Elegant Snowflake border die and just used liquid glue to adhere those in place. Then I decided to add just a little bit of bling to some of those snowflakes, so I just used some star-shaped rhinestones that I had in my stash. Now, the one thing about an easel card is that you do need to have a little bit of a kickstand for the top of the card to rest up against. So I cut a piece of pink cardstock that measures 8 1/4 by 3/4 of an inch. And I stamped my sentiment, and as you can see, I did not stamp it right in the center. It is very off center, but I figured I wasn't going to start over. I would just sort of balance that out by adding a couple of more snowflakes. And you can tell that it's still off center, but in the end, it worked out okay. After I glued the snowflakes to the pink strip of cardstock, I added some foam tape to the back of that and adhered that on the inside of the card. And where you place it on the inside of the card is entirely up to you. It just depends on how straight up and down you want that panel to stand. I wanted mine to stand up pretty straight, so I went a little bit more than 1/3 of the way from the bottom of the card when I adhered my little kickstand. Of course, after I adhered my little kickstand, I noticed that my snowflakes were getting in the way, so I very carefully lifted them up and just moved them down so that they wouldn't get in the way of that panel that butts up against the little kickstand. After I'd moved the snowflakes down a little bit, that was it. That was the final step to finish up my card. Thank you so much for joining me. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, we'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.